So this section is one of the ones I'm really looking forward to. It's about policy. No, but I think it's really interesting when we have a situation that we have in Sweden, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of innovators, cities that are changing, new strategies to be built. So currently there's a national and several regional food strategies being developed. We don't see this work as anything, competing with that, but you're rather adding on to it, because the tech component is also one that really can benefit from good policy. So Niklas, when it comes to the policy side of things, how open would you say that you are from the political side when it comes to supporting the new development within the food scene?
I would say that we want to be very supportive, but we haven't really succeeded all the time. It's a change that's happening in society as a whole. When you're looking at, you bring in tech, you're trying to change, and we are trying to adapt a more agile environment for the whole policy scene. That sometimes we have authorities that are supposed to control things, for example. How do we make sure that they are in discussion with the innovators all the time in order to know that, so you don't end up when having innovated something and you want to put it on the market and suddenly you realize, well, actually the laws do not accept this at the moment. So you want a little bit more of ping pong where you go to and fro. We're doing that kind of things with policy labs, for example, with the financial markets now, where Finansinspektionen, the financial supervision agency, did not have a very good connection to the startup scene before, where they've started to work together with the startups to see, how should we develop our work together so that we can bring something forward. And that's something we have to do together all the time, I think, in order to...
So we can see forward to a policy lab on food in the future?
I would hope so. But it's also a bit about how do you collect all the actors in this? Because we have to go together and do this together. It's not something, that the authorities or the state can do on its own. Then it gets it doesn't get anywhere. You have to do it together with the actors in the actual industry in order to go.
Interesting. So we're of course doing a lot of stuff there with the entrepreneurs. But Jonas, you're gathering together all the players in the traditional food sector, right?
Yes, we do, and we try to contribute to what can we do, and also we need to mix it up with startups. Otherwise, we will end up in it's a little bit protectional way of developing. It's not evolution. It's more like small evolution. It's no revolution because, of course, there's a lot of you here, and everybody's protecting their arena. So I think we need to mix it up with some startups, and that's why you and I have the discussion. How can we mix the industry, the traditional industry, with startups and new thinking?
Yeah, and Olof, a question: when you sit and analyze the shit out of the world, which is what you guys do at
stuff
BCG,
we do, yeah,
stuff you do every day, really efficient system. Really efficient systems out there. I guess they do have the components of the new and the old and policy gathered together.
Obviously, yeah. But I think when we look at the world, it's two parts. One part is a general growth, obviously, but then also you need to remember that one part is sort of a zero-sum game, and what we're tearing our hair trying to figure out is why is it that the massive transformational tech organizations and companies, why do they always end up either in the US or now in Asia? And we're trying to break that down into components. So we say that, well, one part of Asia is obviously many of those countries are not democracies, so they can do these targeted decisions very fast. Maybe we don't want to, walk down that line. But, what can we do as a small open economy to compete, with the other regional areas? And I think one area is exactly as you talk about around policies. If we could be more forward-looking, on our toes, thinking just a little bit ahead, how we can enable things instead of being slow and sort of backward leaning, that could be a massive competitive advantage also to the US. Then we need to combine that with European corporations and export regulations and so on and so forth. But it could be small things. My favorite example is drones, right? How could it be that Sweden lost like 36 months of drone development because we had this ridiculous rule around transport regulation and surveillance that you couldn't use them for food delivery, for instance. It's just if someone had thought about it just a little bit earlier, we could have wiped that out. And it's still not solved, by the way. I have a good friend who is pilot. If someone flies a drone more than 150 meters above sea level in Mälardalen, you close down Bromma Airport. Yeah, exactly, right? There is no technical reason, a Boeing 747 landing, they don't bother for, but, we just still need to think it forward.
But the thing is here, so if we can solve those issues, we will have GDP growth, create new jobs and stuff like that.
Yes. Well, not the drones alone, but I mean, that was one example.
Drones. I'm talking about Foodtech here.
But then there are other, and I do understand many of them are very politically sensitive, but I mean, there are also things we need to discuss as a nation regarding, taxation of extremely high risk entrepreneurial endeavors, right? Option programs, capital tax, capital allocation, and these kinds of things. Because we see that in other countries, and they're much more successful. So,
yep. Sverker, you have been working on both sides of the fence, so to say, and both with the political side of things and now on the private side of things. So what did you think that you could bring with you from the one to the other and the other way around?
That was a long time ago. It's 25 years ago I was in politics, so I've almost forgotten, to be honest. But I think this regulation thing, I think we have a lot of stuff that's going to happen in food tech. Some of that's going to come up against regulation. I'm not sure, but I heard someone, for instance, saying that if you grow crickets, grasshopper. And you're not allowed to sell them as a food product because the regulations don't allow for that. Now, if someone actually came up with an idea to make those crickets actually taste good, because the ones I've tasted didn't taste good, but if you can actually make them taste good somehow and make some, I mean, you can't have regulations stand in the way for that, because that is one of the, we talk about animal protein. The main reason why animal protein is not so good for the planet is that the animal uses a lot of energy and produces only very little protein, whereas cold-blooded animals like insects, they are much more energy efficient, and therefore we shouldn't have regulations stand in the way of that. If we can eat insects, we eat insects if they're swimming underwater. We call them shrimps. But if they're in the air, we're not allowed to eat them. How stupid is that? So that's just one example. There's going to be lots of those examples around where regulation has to move very, very quickly to spur on innovation and to make sure that people can actually dare to get involved, really.
Okay, but Niklas, don't we have a pretty good setup in Sweden, really? Because you're from Näringsdepartementet, the Ministry of Trade and Commerce, and you also sit very tightly together with the rural side of it.
Yes, we do. I think we have there are a few things I'd like to comment on here. First of all, I think we should have a little bit more self-confidence when it comes to whether we're good or not in Sweden. If I look at the Swedish startup scene, I think it's extremely successful. And always looking at, why don't we get the Amazons? Well, maybe we're aiming a bit too high then, if we think that should happen in Sweden and to become that big, because size does matter when it comes to economy, and we normally do punch above our weight when we're looking at Sweden as a country. But so when we have the Swedish competitiveness strategy is not like always done after, like we want to be the biggest, but basically what we want to do is to make sure that we can change all the time. That's how we can be successful and do something different from yesterday. Why the discussions when it comes to regulations, the way of like whether it's drone or crickets or these kind of things, that becomes extremely important. It's very difficult for us to develop some kind of policies in order to make sure, that we get big companies, because basically that's market economy. It's going to change a lot. We cannot make sure that, it's not that much better just because something is Swedish owned or something. But when we're looking at how do we change fast, we can see that there is a lot of issues in the Swedish system. It takes 2 years to change a law. So even though that everybody agrees that this law is not good, it takes 2 years to change it, which has its benefits and its doubts. Because of course, if you can change something very, very fast, that's also a problem when you're looking at a democracy. Sometimes you change things, but we're living in a time where we need to change fast, because we see a lot of things happening in Asia. They change very fast when it comes to some of these areas. So I'm much more inclined to look at these areas. How do we make sure that we change all the time, and to make sure that our society, that people go together and try to change things. And it's so important that the industry itself collects itself, looking at the strategies, wanting to do something, because it doesn't matter what you innovate or what you come up with if you don't find the way to commercialize it, to get it out to a market. If that doesn't happen, you haven't really changed anything, right? So it's an extremely important step that we need to get into this.
Jonas, when it comes to changing things, you who come from the more traditional side of things, are you really interested in changing, or would you rather preserve?
Well, that's a good question. It's very comfortable to just lay back and do nothing. But I think Menigo as a company, we are very into digital change, because we have a lot of data, and also we have a lot of connections. We have a lot of suppliers, we have a lot of customers, and I think we can use that data and also the knowledge to change the business. And I think, as I used to tell my employees, that my grandfather, he did the same 1899. He took his horse and went to the other village and served it the same way as we do. We have trucks and some data, but I think we could change challenge the value chain and also the supply chain. And I think one of the benefits in all the policies we have in Sweden that we could also use much more is that we have some demanding legacies. We have very tough demands on how we treat our animal production, and also how we use pesticides in our farming and so on. And I think we could use that as a benefit when we compare to other markets, because we have quite clean food in Sweden. Of course, some is 100% and some is not, and that could be a challenge. And that is also where we see our position, where we can help the value chain. And also, I think a challenge for the startups companies, not only to look on the front end of the value chain to meet the customer, it's also to look in the back end. How can we connect the customer, we who runs warehouses, with some technology or no technology, and the farmers? I think there's a lot of things where we can contribute with new technology, because then we can also affect shrinkage, we can affect product on demands and so on. But it's a lot of focus on the front end, but we need to look on the whole value chain.
Niklas, you had a comment?
Just a short comment on what Jonas said. One of the really good things that we see happening now is, of course, that the tech sector have shown that you can actually get funds in order to challenge the incumbents, which is extremely important when it comes to change. But also, what Jonas added here, that if you can actually get, the incumbents to want to change, if you can get it internal, if you can get the startups to meet up with the large companies or the public sector when it comes to public procurement, etc., then we can make change happen even faster. Because some people will, of course, combat change, like you said, and you need to have a society where people can want change, accept change, benefit from change. If we lose that, change becomes more difficult.
Okay. Sverker, a question for you. It's like you spend a lot of time in the UK. But if you compare Sweden and the UK, are the Brits, of course, they are on the front line when it comes to food tech, automation now, since Brexit will have everyone leave, and but are they on the front line when it comes to policy? Do they understand that materia? Oof. Are they as good as we are when it comes to getting everything together?
Sweden can change fast. I mean, I remember when I was in government, we changed telecoms in 2 years, whereas in America it took them 30 years to do less, actually, and they were amazed when we talked to them. And in fact, so we've demonstrated we can create change. I think what you said before here is that we shouldn't underestimate what we have. Also, we have some fantastic food in Sweden, but we don't really market it. So we have an enormously high standard for animal husbandry, for poultry, for pigs, for cows, mainly for pigs and poultry. I think that we have uniquely high standards of that we don't really tell anyone about. So there was this big uproar in England that Danish bacon was horrible because Jamie Oliver said so, but there was no one from Sweden there saying that, well, actually Swedish bacon is much better than Danish bacon, and we just miss so many opportunities of selling very high value produce. We have these. We have game, so we have reindeer, we have deer, we have moose or elks. We have all sorts of wild animals in this country that we could add a lot of value to, and then sell it at a very high price to other parts of Europe, because there is this uniqueness of what we have that we don't exploit. We need some support from government, I think, but there also needs to be more innovation about how to package that to make the Germans want to eat our reindeer, basically.
Okay, that's wonderful. You had a comment there, Olof.
No, I was listening and thinking for a second, and it's always an interesting debate around size, right? But if I allow myself to make a slight historical overlook, right? I mean, obviously, population and land has been correlated with wealth and power, throughout the millennia, right? But not as strongly as you would think, right? I mean, it started with, some would say the irrigation systems, of northern Africa and the Egyptians, right? And they got world power because they could, feed their people. And maybe the Romans, because of the road construction systems, got, more wealth and power than they deserved. And then we had the naval and the marine development that allowed Europe to colonize. And then we had the Industrial Revolution. That's what we're looking at right now. And now, however, I and some people like myself believe that the technology shift we're seeing now is digital technology, whatever we call it. And historically, the winning nations and regions were the ones where the emperor or the king or whoever said, let it happen, and it happened. I fundamentally believe that if we believe, which I do, that technology right now is our new industrial age, our emperor, which is, the people that we elect for government, if they dare to say, let it happen, that could enable us to gain much more wealth and power than our size and land mass otherwise would. And I think right now that's not happening. Looking at Europe, even if Sweden is small, Europe is the world's largest economy, and we have a very small share of technology and development. And it would be sad for my grandchildren, I think, to miss this opportunity. And then an example again, of course, autonomous driving. Everyone knows that this is happening. It has impact on food. And then some nations, many nations, especially in Europe, they say, nah, you know what, let's fold over for the taxi lobby. I mean, yeah, but we are. They will be unemployed in 5 years anyway, right? But we still fall for that. I mean, we say, let's prevent Uber from operating.
So this is a good advice. Don't fall over for the food lobby. You say it's going to be changed, right?
Let's be positive. How about Sweden with a lot of landmass would say, let's enable autonomous driving in one part of one city and one large part of a less densely populated area. And we would have every single tech company on the planet interested in autonomous driving, investing money there. Because no one is doing it. It's like it's an open opportunity.
No, but you're talking about test beds now, and I think that isn't that a traditionally strong Swedish area, actually, Niklas?
Well, actually, when it comes to autonomous driving, that's an area where we're putting a lot of efforts in Sweden, in Gothenburg, around Gothenburg, together with Volvo, with Scania, with Autoliv, with Zenuity, which is their new company together. And there's an area where you can say that, which is also when it comes to innovation policy and what we're doing here, compared to, for example, a Foodtech sector. It's an area where government, academia, and industry has been working together for a very long time. So it's very easy to find each other and to do these projects together, because there are counterparties, because all the innovation policy the government gets into, more or less, it has to be like 50% funded from the industry in order for us to do those kind of very large projects. Sometimes that demands a lot of resources. So it's an area where we actually in Sweden believe that we are quite in the forefront. There's a lot of things happening. We are doing a lot of policy, looking into policy things at the same time, because we realize this will change a lot of laws when it comes to things like that. So actually I think that's a very good area where cooperation is working quite fine in Sweden. And I think that if you would ask the automotive industry, they'd be very happy.
No, they're
to
happy,
tell
but
you.
they're big companies, right? How do we get the small ones in on this as well? Because that's not the Swedish tradition.
No, that's the thing. Like, how do you get the small ones into this? And we are trying to do a few things where we think that how do we get the smalls to cooperate with the big, to help the bigs have, like for example in the life science sector, where AstraZeneca is inviting a lot of startups to be in their production facilities and being there and to try to help with those kind of things. But we need the industry to tell us what to do, basically, that this is what we want to do. We cannot sit from the government and say, this is how you should do that. I don't believe that really is a good way to solve the issues.
That's a very good. And then we'll close this one. Sorry, no questions. I think you'll have to catch them separately because we're running out of time. So what should we tell the captains of Sweden, the ministers and the state secretaries? Sverker, you start.
No, I kind of agree that we should just let people get on with it.
Do good shit.
Yeah.
Olof.
I talked too much already, but I think if you believe that history will repeat itself, then the change will not come from the existing players. So if we talk about driving, I think 20 years from now we won't see a single brand existing anymore of the ones we see on the streets today, apart from Tesla maybe.
So let the new ones in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the combination of I don't fully agree with you, but I think a combination to make the meeting points with the traditional player and the startup. And now I heard that we get some 50% funding.
That's really good. Right? Taxpayers' money at work.
So I think that's a good start.
That's good. Just any last comments?
Well, the let the new ones in, I think it's a very important part of how we try to develop Sweden, and this is something that I don't think we even differ around the political spectrum. Being a free trade country where you should actually make sure that there is competition from wherever in Sweden. I think that's important.
Wonderful. And thank you so much to the panel. Thank you.